Episode of Some Witty Comment, an Esports podcast. This episode today will be about franchising in esports. Here with me today is Jay Chen, also known as Hibiscus, and Kevin Rapsard, who's also known as Xenoman. If you guys want to introduce yourselves further, that'd be swell.
I just realized you're the only one with like the video camera, and it's like, I wish I had mine.
No, it's fine.
Alright, well next time we'll set up more than half an hour before we want to go live.
Next time I won't be detrimentally sick.
Yeah, no, we got 2-6. All right, I'm Kevin, Xenoman, or however you want to pronounce it. I play a lot of Dota, but I watch a lot of other things. That's about it. I watch a lot of esports just on Twitch because I'm like, yeah, that's what I do. I don't know why.
Jay, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Okay. My name is Jay. I've been playing League, I think I've been playing League for ever since the end of season 4, and then I started playing more competitively around season 5. I have a little bit of background into Dota 2. That's how I first started out, and I try my best, but esports is fun and I like it a lot.
Dude, nice.
Solid, Jay. You're good at League. It's okay.
Fuck it up.
So I'm Joey. I first got involved with esports playing StarCraft 2. Then I moved on to playing Counter-Strike for a while, and then I played Hearthstone for a little bit, and then I've been playing Overwatch for the last couple of years. So done a lot of game hopping, but never played League or Dota. So
technically, you played in the official pro Dota match.
all right, the singular game of Dota I played doesn't count. I don't think I'm a fair representative on Dota esports.
For those unfamiliar with how Dota International works, there's an open qualifier, and he downloaded the game an hour before the qualifier started, and I told him how the game worked, and then we played in a professional Dota 2 match and lost in 15 minutes.
It was a solid 75 minutes.
The game lasted 15.
I had Dota installed for an hour and a half.
That's pretty good.
All right. So
But anyhow,
so I'll start out and explain a little bit about we'll start out and explain a little bit about some of the current examples of franchising in esports. Specifically, as far as I'm aware, that's just Overwatch and League for right now. There's a few other leagues that are rumored that may or may not happen, but in terms of concrete franchising systems, these are the only two that I'm aware of. So in terms of Overwatch League, the Overwatch League is currently consisting of Blizzard, which is the developer of Overwatch, 12 teams, which are somewhat spread throughout the world and are co-owned by organic esports orgs and just general well-known business people, pretty commonly like North American sports teams owners. I believe that a lot of the slots in the league sold for around like $5 and $20 million a piece, depending on the specific negotiations and the date of the sale, roughly. Among those teams, there's anywhere from 6 to 12 players on a roster. You need a minimum of 6 players to play Overwatch, and then the league allows up to 6 substitute players on a roster at a given time. Past that, each team generally has like 1 to 3 coaches. Those serve different purposes depending on the team, plus other like support staff for the players. There's a couple of like cooks and stuff and nutritionists and other roles like that, physical trainers. So there's anywhere from 72 to 144 players in the current system for Overwatch League. They're talking about potentially expanding that to more than 12 teams in the future. But currently with the current system, it's just 12 teams. And then within that, the league plays, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, 4 essentially splits. I forget the exact word that they use for them, but it's basically 5 weeks of gameplay with a split playoff at the end of it. So you play 2 teams each week for 5 weeks. So you play 10 matches. You play 10 of the 11 other teams. And then depending on your win-loss ratio and other tiebreakers that are factored in, you play in a split playoff for prizes from there. And then at the end of those 4, they take your overall record to decide your standings into the playoffs. And then that's where we are right now, is in the downtime before playoffs. Actually, the first quarterfinal match for the Overwatch League playoffs is in like 2 hours from now, I think. So that'll be pretty hype. But that's about it. Do you guys have any questions about that, or just like a quick rundown?
I mean, if it's a quick rundown, we'll probably come back, pick on some points of that for a bit. But
sure.
Let's the different thing about League is franchising is it's just NA. Am I correct there, Jay?
Yeah, it's just NA so far. I think there's been talks that EU is trying to, but I haven't heard any like major progress yet.
So you want to give us a rundown of how that worked, how they switched over and stuff?
Okay, I mean, it all, in a nutshell, it all basically started through TSM. Actually, TSM was the one that like spearheaded the franchising run. When he, there's some controversy between him and like Mark Merrill, the CEO, and basically TSM Reginald got every single team except Echo Fox to sign off on franchising. So they basically got 10 teams, like some of them like TSM, CLG, C9, Team Liquid, like the original orgs they stayed on. Well, we got some orgs like from we got some orgs from NBA, like I think the Cavs, Houston Rockets. I don't follow basketball, but basically the NBA had some stake. Has some stake in the teams, like 100 Thieves, Clutch Gaming, Golden Guardians. Who else? I think there's one more, but I forgot. But yeah.
So, like, as opposed to how it was before, what's different between NALCS now as its franchise versus when it wasn't franchised? Like, what changed?
So basically what changed is that there's no more relegation series. Like, at the end of each split, I think it was each split. I didn't follow Esports like that much back when back before like franchising, but basically the last 2 teams in the standings, I think it was the spring, but definitely in the summer. I don't think it was the spring, but anyways, 2 teams from the bottom 2 teams from LCS, and then the top 2 teams from this from the challenger scene, which is basically kind of like played how the internationals played, where there's like an open qualifier where you can like just make a team of people and then just like play.
Do the whole Cinderella story, come up from nothing.
Yeah, basically. So yeah, the top 2 teams, and then like if you qualified for Challenger Series, you get to play in the Challenger Series, which, I mean, some teams from like the bigger teams, like I know CLG had an academy team, but it was usually just you can just make a team and then you can qualify. But basically the top 2 teams from there fight the bottom 2 teams, and then if the bottom 2 teams like won in like this brackets tournaments type series, then they got accepted into LCS, and then the LCS team that loses is relegated back to the Challenger Series.
But now with franchising, the teams are just set, right?
Yeah, the teams are just set, but like instead of the Challenger Series, each big org has like an academy team, which in a nutshell, it kind of works like a 10-man roster, although like most teams don't really switch out academy players with like LCS players, but it is possible.
So
yeah.
It's basically just to foster talent.
I guess we'll kind of get into talking a bit. I guess I'll probe Jay for some information here, because I'm not as familiar with how the NALCS model works as much as the Overwatch League model. But I guess as a starting point, when did NALCS franchise their tournament league? Roughly, like I know this takes a few months to set up, but like when roughly did this happen?
I think this is the second
It happened
year.
right after Worlds, but yeah,
So like winter of last year, so like winter 2017.
yeah, I think so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because
All
no,
right.
yeah,
Right after
after.
Worlds.
Because
So-
Like-
Immortals was a team in the LCS and they qualified for Worlds last year, and then they just got booted off because of franchising.
So yeah, because I remember this now because it was happening at the same time as Overwatch League was setting up their franchising. It was, except I think they took longer to actually wrap it all up, basically. But yeah.
I think NALCS started franchising about the same time as Overwatch franchise, and about the same time that Dota doubled down on not franchising.
Yep. So
I'll mention a little bit about the Dota for a second right now, but like
sure,
it's
go for it.
It's classic esports, where teams just qualify for tournaments, and then they go to them. But there's always the international, the big tournament at the end of the year, and now to get points to be invited to the international, you have to win majors and minors, which are just third-party tournaments that Valve now sponsors and throws more money into. So Valve, I guess it's easy to get sponsors now, but it's just the same thing as like before. It's just they made third-party tournaments, the specific third-party tournaments matter more. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
But all right, I'm gonna start it off first with, as a upcoming pro player. Let's say you're really good at the game, get the scene.
Well-
how do you get to being a pro player? Let's start with that. That's kind of where I want to start here.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, that's where I was gonna go, just at a slightly different angle, so that works out. In Overwatch League, they have a, what do they call it? I think it's Path to Pro. I should have looked this up beforehand, but basically, here, I'll put it in the chat so everybody can see it. But roughly what their plan is that you get onto either an Academy League team, so similar to NALCS, a lot of the Overwatch League teams have Academy teams. I don't believe it's a requirement. Just a lot of them are choosing to make an Academy team, and then from there it's essentially like talent recruitment onto the main roster, potentially. Other options include playing through Contenders, which is kind of like Overwatch League Lite, but it's kind of similar to, I guess, the Challenger system in League, except it doesn't directly feed into the League. It's just implied that the best players from Contenders will get picked up to an Overwatch League team.
Okay.
Because
Also,
it's an officially Blizzard-sponsored tournament. Sorry, what's up?
So it's a Blizzard-sponsored tournament, but it's not a franchise league. Because I'm looking at teams here, and
Yep.
I just see like Vici Gaming, LGD,
it's a lot of
Classic,
random
Esports
teams. It's
Singularity.
It's a lot of like Academy teams, classic grassroots esports organizations, and also just straight up mixed teams that aren't under an organization. Like FNR GFE is a very well known example of that. They don't actually have an org. But yeah, so there's contenders for each region.
Is it like an open qualifier kind of thing?
There's just an open qualifier basically. It's fully open. And then from there, it's presumed that you'll get picked up onto an Overwatch League team if you're good enough. But, yeah, I guess I'll get into that a little bit later. But it hasn't. They put out those 2 or 3 options as a way to pursue getting into Overwatch League, but at least so far they haven't proven to be terribly effective. Jay, is there? I know that there was the Challenger system before, and you briefly mentioned Academy teams. Is there anything in League that, in the new NALCS franchise system, that allows for players to get involved with the NALCS?
Yes, but I mean, it's not as like structured as Path to Pro. It's basically just like if you're high challenger and you're seen as like a really insane player, then you just get offers. Like orgs will just like reach out and email you, and then you basically like if you want to, then just try out or some shit. But nowadays it's just like I mean, chances are you're probably just gonna be placed in academy because like the academy system is more stable. Like it's kind of just like structured like LCS format, and it's just another way to foster talent that doesn't affect like LCS, which like quote unquote matters, but you know, NALCS lol wild card region. Anyways,
Is
um,
sorry, go on.
oh no, I didn't have any other. What was your
Um,
question?
is the way that the academy teams go about picking up talent and promoting them into the NALCS, do you think it's effective in nature? Like, does it give them, obviously the environment of like high level solo queue is very different than high level like pro level team play, but do you think that picking up, like, say for example a top ladder perspective gets picked up by an academy team, do you think that the academy team actually does an effective job of preparing that player to potentially play in the league?
Oh, I think it's much better than what it used to be because like you had
Okay.
a chance. You have a chance to be like switched out. Like C9 has been like, I mean, although they're like last in their placings, they've been like actively switching out, or yeah, quote unquote actively switching out like players between the academy teams and LCS teams, which definitely from like last, like before franchising, you would just have like subs,
Mm-hmm.
and you would just like, I mean, it's different internationally because you can only bring one sub to an international tournament instead of like the full academy roster.
Right.
But yeah, it's, you definitely have a shot to actually play games, and it's actually like a much better way to foster talent. But like nowadays with like the popularity of streaming and like, I don't know, the how do I say this, the cynicism of like of people that like play in NA, because like NA is just memed a lot internationally.
in every sport.
It's Yeah,
Yeah, and
it's
everything.
it's basically there's not a lot of interest to becoming pro than it was like last, like I think I don't know if it's franchising exactly that's because of that, like I don't have enough information, but there's definitely been a trend of like I mean it's like both franchising and then the increasing popularity of streaming just being more lucrative than actually being a pro player.
Yeah.
It's a I will like Dota's always not had a ton of like dedicated streamers. We're getting a lot more recently, but like Dota people that are really good, they always, I don't know, they always have they still have that Cinderella story, you know. They play in the
Mm-hmm.
qualifiers, you know, get to a big tournament. I guess the big difference is because it's still the same. You still have to like make some sort of team, go through like some opens, try to get onto the top things. The difference between Dota, where I see, versus the franchise things, is if you go through the open qualifiers, get to the things, you can just go to TI
Mm-hmm.
like within like a month. Whereas the other ones, you're probably gonna have to wait like at least a year before you get it into a good like a stable position as a pro player. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
assuming those academy teams and those like contenders leagues do not get paid that much.
Not as far as I'm aware, no. And that's kind of part of my issue with them is that um, my limited knowledge of traditional sports, pretty much the entire, um, I mean, it's part of the dynamic that esports has to deal with because it tends to be younger competitors than in traditional sports. And it hasn't really, I mean, in the past, esports careers were very short, but I think that honestly probably had more to do with like contracts and salaries at the time and like marketability post career than anything else. We haven't really seen in like this modern era of like pretty lucrative salaries, like how long an esports career really can be. But we have like, I mean, quite a few players that are like hitting 5 years plus now, whereas in the past that was limited to only a handful of people. So time will see how long they last for. But in traditional sports, I believe a lot of the college system where players play through college and get extra years of practice and then are scouted and then picked up by a team, provides a way for players to get structured practice very easily. And then it also has, or well, not easily, but a method for structured practice to occur. And whether or not you like agree that they're getting paid, they're definitely being financially incentivized through like lucrative scholarships. And I mean, I think we can all agree that like scholarships are pretty equivalent to like straight dollars. Um, but I think there's a big difference between what traditional sports have in terms of feeding players into their franchise leagues than what Overwatch and League has available to them with their academy teams and contenders and like ladder as a way to pick up top new prospective players, I don't think it really prepares them properly for the environment that they'll experience.
And on the other side, because if you're like, let's say, a tier 2 team in Dota, I mean, you just don't go to the tournaments, you just don't make money because you don't get those prize pools, which is the other thing. So like now they added more minor systems where the minors played first now. So because last year, big like the Dota Pro Circuit is that all the pro teams were going to minors as well if they can make them. So the minors were just majors with smaller prize pools at that point. They're changing it up this year, so it's like they do the major qualifiers and then the minor qualifiers. If you're in the major, you can't go in the minor kind of thing. So it's probably a little bit better for the tier 2 scene, but like I feel like it's always been tier 2 scenes in esports are just so hard to stay in there if you don't get out to the top 16 teams in your game.
I think though that I guess that's a big argument I can see both sides on for franchising versus not franchising is that, I guess to summarize, that I think franchising supports the top handful of teams very effectively, but struggles to support tier 2 and improving players to the same degree that like an open scene such as like Counter-Strike or Dota or Melee or StarCraft does. Like as you mentioned, like a more traditionally esports model where like you just play, you rise up through the rankings, eventually you get picked up by a team or you have a big tournament placing, you get onto a team, you practice with them, you compete with them, and you just play in like an open circuit with open qualifiers. And while like Cinderella stories and those memes like that are all pretty rare, like getting like a no-name person in the top 8 or the top 16 is actually like a huge deal for them and for like just the lore of the tournament. It makes matches that would not normally be very interesting because like no one in a franchise league really cares about like 11th place playing against 12th place, but if it's like a no-name player or a no-name team playing against a known quantity, then it makes it a little bit more interesting because you kind of get to potentially see some up-and-coming players, and it helps with the storylines. But I also think in the short term it improves the competitiveness of the league by having franchising, so it takes care of many things that normally people in an open league would have to worry about. So things like salaries or like which leagues you're playing in or whatever, like you just know you're playing in this league on these days and you know you're playing against these people and you don't have to worry about figuring out any of those specifics or making decisions on that.
Really? I think it kind of ruins competitiveness.
In what way?
In the sense that like a lot of and this has been like memed about too, but like a lot of there's some players that are seen as that, oh, he's only in it for like the stable salary, like NA is just a region where people like, I think NA as a region, like they pay the players the most. It might be I think Korea might be second, but yeah, a lot of people come to NA for a reason. They just get a lot of money because people in NA are just willing to pay a lot in their salaries. Like there's a player named Power of Evil that like there's a controversial issue where like he was originally an EU West player, EU LCS player, and he was like I think for this event called Rift Rivals where like, I know it was All Stars where like people have to vote in playing for you vote in like the top player and like the role, and then like it's like a popularity contest and then they play in the tournament.
Mm-hmm.
It's like an all-star tournament kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like Power of Evil was like spouting a lot of shit like EU Blood, like he'll never leave or some shit, like EU Pride, and then he like immediately, like not even like after All Stars ended, he announces that, hey, I'm gonna be on Team Optic in NA because they have the better opportunity to help me win Worlds XD, even though they drafted like I think the only other redeeming factor in their old roster was like, I mean, their AD was kind of good at the time, and then I think I don't remember who their jungle. If there was Acadian, I think Acadian was
I don't think
alright.
it's just us. But like
Right.
there's like going to like I don't think you can fault anyone for going to like a team that pays you more. That's kind
No,
of what you do. But also I think it's total bullshit that they're just doing it for the money. Because I mean, all of those pro players love their game and they want to win that game. You know what I mean?
like the relegation series like kept teams on their toes. Like it wasn't the best system, but it was like, I mean, I don't know, the Cinderella story, like how you guys described, didn't like rarely ever happens in League, because like the LCS teams are just miles above whatever, like you, or at least usually miles above whatever any challenger team has to offer. Even like the worst teams, like they're still better than challenger. So like I think that's why like we introduced franchising, because there's just like, okay, there's like legit just no, like little to no reason to keep the old system. Or at least that's how I saw it.
I think what we're coming up to here is like what different groups are there in the franchising system, and then what are their goals that they want to achieve through the franchising system.
Like,
So
like different like players, team owners.
I would put that as 4 different groups of people. Well, I would say 3 or maybe 4 depending on the league, but that would be 1, players, so the players competing in the league or players that are trying to get into the league or whatever. 2, team owners. 3, the developer of the game, and 4, spectators. So, players.
I'm also going to add a 5th one because it matters for Dota, not the other 2. I guess it still matters. Is the organizer of the tournament, because
well, I'm specifically talking about in franchise leagues here. I mean, I think an open ecosystem has a different like this is a different conversation, but specifically team owners, at the end of the day, it's a business for them, so they're trying to make money here. So they do that through marketing, and marketing can either just be public appeal or it can be performance. So like having good tournament results in itself is marketing, just because people want to watch the best team. So there's different avenues you can go about that, but it does not necessarily mean that you need to win. You can just have a team of popular players, and that is a successful business model for a team, potentially. Players can be motivated by varying degrees of like success and money. So some players just want to win, some players are just in it for the money because they need the money for their career or whatever, and some are in it for a variation of the two or whatever, to varying degrees. And then the developer wants to promote their game, so they just want people to watch and see it happen, so they care a lot about spectators. And then spectators want a good viewing experience and presumably good games to be played, so they care about how competitive the league is. So at the core of it all, it comes down to whether you care more about the marketability and viewing experience of it versus the pure competitive aspect of pushing the game as hard as possible, like in terms of the level of gameplay. Like
in a sense, those could kind of like if you push it hard as possible, you'll get still like some spectators want that.
Right. No, I'm saying that spectators want that, but not. It doesn't necessarily benefit team owners to pursue that, because from the perspective of team owners, they don't care if it's 100 pros playing at 100% versus 120%. They're still equals, so it doesn't matter what level of play they're playing at the end of the day, if they're the best.
Fair point.
But from the spectator's point of view, they do care about that to some extent. So I think it's balancing that dynamic is also another thing that's important to keep track of here. Personally, I feel like in the short term, franchising helps with the level of competition just by creating structure and promoting that, but I think it incentivizes business decisions that aren't necessarily good for the competitiveness or the level of gameplay that is played. So specifically, like making decisions for the team in relation to marketing because you know that you aren't going to be relegated, or picking up players that are popular brands specifically because they're popular brands, or just not pushing their players or taking on more sponsorship obligations than they need to because they know they just need the money. I mean, these aren't like real world examples that have happened because, I mean, frankly, like franchising in esports has only been around for a little bit of time and most of this isn't public knowledge, but I think these are like real world examples that could reasonably happen in a franchising system. So from the perspective of a spectator, how do you think that you could structure a franchising system or change an existing one in a way that would promote pushing competitiveness without hurting the bottom line business? I think is my big question.
I feel like franchising or not franchising, I feel like you lose something either way.
Sure.
And it's just kind of what you're willing to lose in that thing. And I think like in a way, like franchising, it's like you're kind of giving up the Cinderella story. Like you can still like come into the scene. I'm not saying that it's impossible to get into the scene now, but like you're taking away like kind of like the pub mentality of like if I just do really good in this pubs, I can just show up to like Worlds this year or show up to whatever the Overwatch finals is called. I don't know what it's called. No, okay, but like you can call me that. It's called like World Championship or something.
Overwatch League Finals. Something like that.
You should come up with a better name for that. But anyhow, so like you're kind of giving away that like Cinderella story. You can just do that this year. You kind of like you have to work for it. It takes a little bit longer, but in exchange, I think your players in general are more relaxed, and in the sense that they know that they're not screwed if they lose. Because like in Dota, like if you get knocked out from the group stage of TI as a professional team, like your team disbands. Like if you don't make it to TI, your team disbands essentially. Like very few teams will stick together not going to TI, and that's like it's terrifying.
The Counter-Strike ecosystem is pretty interesting because I would honestly say that it has like the biggest, I mean, I don't know Dota, so maybe I could be wrong, but I would go out on a limb to say that it has like the biggest and healthiest tier 2/tier 3 scene of like any esports game. And I think that's attributed both to the structure of the majors, which is the big tournament in Counter-Strike, and also the width of tournaments that are hosted by different TOs. We had a brief issue with oversaturation, and you can talk about this in Dota if you want a little bit.
It was huge oversaturation last year.
This kind of resolved naturally because top teams realized how many tournaments they could play in and still be effective, and decided to just start picking and choosing which team tournaments to play in, which left tournaments for tier 2 and tier 3 teams to show up and play in and get some screen time. And
instead of letting that like solve naturally, which I think I kind of would have, they just kind of made it like, so now you do the qualifiers for the major, and if you drop out of the qualifiers for the major, you just do the qualifiers for the minor now. So it's like the top 16 teams of that time are going to the major, and then there's like another 16 slots or something that can go to the minor now, which helps tier 2 teams quite a bit now. The only downside to like the minor system now is that you have top teams 16 through 32. As a tournament organizer, like I'm gonna go to sponsors and go like, hey, I have the second best top 16 teams, sponsor me. Like that doesn't work. Like I think it's much harder for smaller tournament organizers to run a minor because you will not have the top teams. You will not get the same viewing as major. I mean, like perhaps like let's say EG just drops out of the qualifiers, they'll come into the minor. You can't predict that though. You know what I mean? I feel like on average you're gonna have way less viewership at the minor than as the major. I think that's like that hurts tournament organizers a tiny bit, but I mean they still have a tournament.
I don't know if it's like this in Dota, but at least in Counter-Strike, a lot of top streamers are on tier 2 or tier 3 teams. So I think that majors and so on just bring in a lot of viewers because it's essentially the championship of the game. But lower level matches still bring in a lot of viewers just because of the marketability of the people that are playing on the teams. So
I think Dota, out of all the esports I've ever watched, has the worst streamers. Not saying that like Dota streamers are just god awful, but like our top streamers like are like I can name English streamers off the top of my head right now that stream consistently, like Gork, uh, Wagamama, Banana Slamma Jamma, Admiral Bulldog, who's a retired pro player that's not going to play pros anymore. And then there's like a couple other ones that show up at certain points, but like you could count the top 10 streamers on your hands and there wouldn't be like that much debate because there's not that many. So like in terms of streamers playing, it's really just like tier 2, like pro players stream when they have time and people watch pro players. Like there's no, we don't have like the entertaining streamer. We don't have like a Cutie Pie, or we don't have like any sort of Hearthstone streamer. We don't have like Crip or something. Like Hearthstone's different obviously, but like.
So Jay, do you have any ideas for solutions for feeding players into the leagues?
In league, I mean.
Well, into a franchise league. I didn't mean to make a pun there.
Not really. I mean, I honestly don't have much like in a big opinion. I mean, it's obviously like there's some people in league that I follow a lot that are like insane players that be like, man, if this guy went pro, he'd probably do pretty well. But I mean, I also think to myself, well, I mean, it's also just solo queue, and then a lot of people that are like solo queue gods. I think Faker started out as a solo queue god, and like I don't know if you know him, but he obviously has made like huge impact.
I might have heard of him once or twice.
Yeah. I've heard of him.
Well, like, I don't know. Solo queue does not equal competitive, and at this point, it's just like, it's nice if NA fostered like their own talent, but a lot of times we just import people. Like we have very like few domestic talents here, and franchising, I don't know, franchising kind of it like I don't hate it necessarily, but I think it stomped out like a lot of like promise. I think there's still like a good chance, but I know that there were some good teams that were like applying to be in the franchising system that just didn't make it because flat out they just didn't make enough money, and that's what it came down to. Like the organizations that were just like very profitable, like TSM, Team Liquid, like they got in like no problem, whereas Team Immortals were just like, I mean, they were like good enough to make it to Worlds, and then I mean they didn't make it out of groups because NA is a wildcard region, you know. But I mean I think they solidified I think they deserved to stay, and then that was kind of like a big controversy. Like they just got booted out because they didn't make a lot of money as opposed to like all the other orgs. So
yeah, that kind of sucks. But like,
think
in the end, like it's better for players because franchising does solidify like their jobs. Like it's not like it's viable to go pro now, like, which is more than what we could say like even like a few years ago, I think. But
for sure,
I don't know. It's a double-edged sword.
The at least in my opinion, to allow for the longevity of franchise leagues, they needed to develop academy teams more.
Yeah.
So investing more, I mean, just flat out more money into them to allow the team or the players better environments to practice. However, to do that, they need to make the teams more marketable so that it's actually like a reasonable business decision to make. And I don't know like the how to that question, but I mean, that's the only solution that I can think of that's reasonable. That would. I
think in the end, a lot of teams are going to be reluctant to do that.
I agree.
I think the key for like longevity in any esport is the tier 2 teams. Like it's kind of weird to think about that way, but like if the tier 2 like scene is healthy, like your esports scene is healthy.
Yep.
If it's unhealthy, it might be healthy for like a couple of years, but it's gonna die off.
Yep.
I think
that's what happened with WCS and StarCraft.
Yeah.
I guess I can talk about that a little bit, but
I'm not familiar with the WCS.
I mean, I can TLDR it. Basically, Overwatch League with no contenders or academy teams. So yeah, I mean, there was a qualifier, but it was it wasn't franchised, but it was kind of like the old LCS model in that there was a bunch of players that got into it at the start, and then a few of them would get kicked out, and then they would play in the qualifiers, and most of them would just play back through the qualifiers anyway. So it was like the gap between players in WCS and players not in WCS was so large that like when somebody did legitimately fall out of WCS, it was very rare that there was a player that came along that was good enough to actually replace them. So a lot of the best players of all time just slowly left or had to go for one reason or another, and there was just no one there to replace them. And then the game just kind of died for a number of reasons, but
yeah, I think that's like why originally Dota went with like the whole minor system, because I mean Valve did it with the CS:GO, and I think it's working pretty well. And I think they're using CS:GO to try to model their Dota scene now. So they're doing the minors. Last year they kind of messed up because just every team just went to every tournament, and they were kind of like, guys, don't go to every tournament. And they're like, we're just gonna go to every tournament, like to the point like where like Evil Geniuses was just sick going to every tournament because they didn't have enough time to rest. They just kept going and playing Dota, and they're like, that's not great. But like now that you can't go to the minor if you're going to the major, it kind of guarantees that tier 2 scene. The only thing that worries me.
Sorry, I didn't catch that.
You cannot go to the minor if you're going to the major.
You can't go to the minor if you're going to the major. Oh, if you're already qualified for the major, you can't go to the minor. Gotcha.
So it kind of guarantees the tier 2 scheme. Honestly, the only downside of that is I think if you're a tournament organizer, it's harder to get sponsors if you don't if you do like a double combo. Let's say like your ESL, your big name, you do the minor and the major, you just pop them together. You can do it like they're right next to each other in terms of dates, so you can just like pop them together, and then you have like you lead up into your major thing. But like for smaller tournament organizers, I feel like I'm not a tournament organizer, obviously. I feel like it's harder to get sponsors when you cannot guarantee any of the top 16 teams coming to your tournament.
No, for sure. Yeah. I mean, either a top team or a team that has very good marketability, but it sounds like that's far and few between in Dota past the tier 1 scene.
Yeah. The thing is, though, what's nice about Dota right now is that I think pretty much like at least the top 16s, everyone's fairly close to each other. Like in like a relatively close. There's no like just team that's just way better. Like Liquid like was really good last year, but I mean like VP's still really good, Secret's still really good. I mean there's still like it's back and forth throughout the tournaments, and like it's better in that sense. There's a lot. It's actually not as far as I think some else thinks it is, but some other like esports, but it's not the most popular team. So I feel like it's hard for team organizers, but Dota Pro Circuit right now and is really good for tier 2 players, pretty decent for tier 1 players, great for spectators. It is fantastic. It's just all good. All the best teams come to the same tournaments. It's on Twitch or it's on Dota TV. We have an in-game streaming service. You can just watch it in client with the casters and everything. You can watch a player perspective. It is fantastic for spectators right now. Good for the game, but for tournament organizers, it's I mean, it's better than in franchising where they don't have a tournament, but at the same time, it's not as good for tier 1s teams.
I guess I'll bring up my next. Do you guys have anything else you want to bring up in regards to feeding players into a franchise league?
I don't think so. No.
Jay.
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Did you have anything else you wanted to add onto this topic of feeding players into a franchise league? Because I have a couple more notes I want to bring up.
I have one other note I really want to bring up. But
in regards to picking up players or other topic?
Another kind of topic.
Oh, okay. I was about to, sure, go ahead. I was going to segue into another topic anyway.
I was going to cycle into, this might have been one of your topics, but of playing on the same patch for the public scene and for the pro scene. And Dota, there is no separate patch. They never do that. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's just kind of you're always on the same patch. So, I mean, I don't play Overwatch or League as my main sport, as my main like game. So It's a little bit different since I'm not like the generic public for those games. But when I play like Overwatch, I'll just play Overwatch for fun and stuff. And then if I go play Overwatch the day and I go play Overwatch League, it's a different patch. And it's different because I'm not as connected to the game as a lot of other people, but I just feel disconnected from that pro scene
As
in a way.
far as I'm aware, I mean, I'm sure there's somebody, but I feel like I'm reasonable in saying that the vast majority of people are not a fan of splitting up patches like that. Like, pro players are, as far as I'm aware, the majority in terms of people that are in favor of that. Mostly just because, I mean, it's reasonable. It's their career. It's their job. Like, they want to be playing on something that they're practiced on, so that they're confident in what they're doing. So it makes sense from their perspective. But from the perspective of a spectator, like a more, I don't even think casual is maybe fair, but anybody short of a prospective pro player, I think you would want to see them playing on the same version of the game as you, because it's kind of like, I don't know, like watching pro players play football at like a different rule set than like a pickup game, or I don't know, it's like not really quite the same game if they're playing on a different patch. I know specifically in the fourth split of Overwatch League, there was a really big controversy with that, because essentially they ended up playing on a patch that was only on live for like 30 or 40 hours, and we ended up watching that for 6 weeks. A metagame that existed for less than a day on the live servers, or less than 2 days, I mean. But I don't know what a reasonable solution is to that, because I know that part of the issue, I guess the best defense I've heard in favor of not being on the same patch is that they roll out patches to live that are not necessarily compatible with the spectate client that they use on the offline LAN server. And by that, what I mean is like, apparently the reason why they used that patch that was only live for 30 hours was because the current live patch that contained a lot of balance updates crashed on like half the maps in the game when you just tried to use the spectate client, and they just couldn't fix it in time. So like that's a pretty reasonable reason not to be on the same patch. But there was definitely a couple of other times where like they didn't really give a reason why they weren't on the current patch, other than just like it was the patch at the start of the split.
And I think League kind of does that, but if I remember correctly, it's not like as bad as Dota, because they don't patch as often. I don't know. Jay, do you have
doesn't it get pretty bad during Worlds? Like they're like way behind during Worlds or something? Like I guess you can talk about that, Jay.
Not anymore. Like there was like season 5 was fucking absolutely awful, like that patch. But like they've been much better with it. Like they learned from that, definitely. They were like, okay, we can't have like a huge patch before Worlds, or else it's gonna like actually be awful.
But like
so
Worlds still plays in the same patch as like pubs for the most part, right? I think they did it a little bit, because I remember Worlds last year, like I can't remember which World was, the Ardent Sensor Worlds, that got patched for the public client like halfway between in Worlds, but it stayed for like the rest of Worlds.
No, yeah, it definitely. I mean, they had to stay for Worlds. Like, there's no way in hell they can like, there's no way they can like alter a patch like during Worlds, or else it's just a huge clusterfuck.
So, shout out to Dota. They stopped doing it, but Dota Pro Circuit this year. Dota Pro Circuit, no, sorry, not Dota Pro Circuit. Dota Asian Championship this year. Like 3 days in, there was 2 new heroes in Captain's mode to play for competitive. Like 3 days into the event. So, I mean, some pro players complain about it, but also I think Dota people just have this weird mindset where they're just like, screw it, go for it, let's go for it, and then they just play it.
I'm not that worried about this issue. Like, it's very frustrating because like there was that split where I'm just like, this patch, like I'm just watching for the storylines basically. Like these matches don't really mean anything in terms of metagame development because the patch is old. But I'm not really worried about this in the long term, at least, because I think Blizzard, I would hope, has learned from the lashback of that split, and it's just a short-term growing problem in the first year of the league that I think they'll hopefully handle more intelligently in future seasons.
Yeah, I think it's like a oh, that was a mistake kind of thing. I think it's just like the difference between franchising and the not franchising for Dota. Like, not patching during tournament is fairly easy. It's like 5 days maybe at max. I mean, they still mess it up because they want to do their every Thursday thing, and they're like, actually, that was a terrible idea. But the difference is like, are you it's probably fair not to change the patch for the whole 6 week in the middle of the 6 weeks because you're playing different teams the whole time. Whereas if you're doing like the tournament structure, you can just patch it in between tournaments, and there's no unfair advantage to any one team because you're still playing everyone on the same patch at each tournament. But it's harder to do that if you're patching more frequently. So like I think the solution is you just don't patch your game, and you only patch your game in between your like splits or in between your seasons or whatever.
I only think of 2 examples outside of the franchising system where a tournament was intentionally deliberately played on a patch that was not current. Both times this happened in Counter-Strike, and there was pretty like specific reasons for why. The first time,
whole like 128 between like 120 for 60 thing, 60 ticks.
That has nothing to do with current patch.
Never
That's
mind.
just how you run a server.
Continue.
So the first time, well, I don't remember the chronological order, but one of them was when they released the R8, which basically just broke the entire economy of the game. Basically, imagine if they released an item that like should totally cost 5k gold, but it actually costs 800 in Dota or League. That's basically what they did. And so, like, literally every pro player basically got together and just went to the TO and was like, we don't want to play on this patch. And you can roll back patches on Steam pretty easily, so they just rolled them back and played on an old patch. And then the other time this happened, if I remember correctly, there was a bug in the physics engine on the new patch, which essentially allowed you to jump, like, significantly higher than normal, which allowed you to like reach dozens of unintended locations on every single map in the game, and basically broke the maps or broke the game so that it was extremely terrace-sided. So like normally there's only on a MOBA game there's a set map, so there's only so many paths to like, I mean, this isn't directly comparable I guess, but say if like there's 3 lanes normally, and then like because of a glitch in the physics of the game on the new engine or the new patch, there's now like 6 pathways, and like there's just like the game is not designed to have attackers with this many options.
That does not translate well to MOBAs.
But
I know what you're talking about.
So it broke the game to the point where like no one wanted to play it basically, so they just agreed to not play on that patch because that was the only significant change really. But generally it's a thing that you only really see in franchise leagues, and I think there is like a sweet spot between playing slightly behind live but not being out of date. It's just hard, I think, to come up with a hard and fast rule to establish that, and I think that maybe a soft rule, or maybe like a panel, or like maybe it's something that a players association could get together with like the league and negotiate on for a split or something, but it would have to be done quickly and communicated effectively, I think.
I also think that's one of the things that as franchising moves forward will kind of go away, because that's something you can kind of just figure out and feel out, learn from mistakes sort of thing. So I feel like at the end that will go away. So, but sure. It right now as it is, it's just really bad for spectators if you're on a completely different patch. But I think we've pretty much explored this.
Yeah. Do you guys have anything else you want to add on to that? Because I have a couple other topics I want to bring up.
Not really, no.
Okay. So I think the effectiveness of a franchise league depends heavily on who the developer of the game is and how directly they're involved with the franchising of the game and the esports scene in general. So specifically, I guess what I mean by that is that Overwatch League is obviously ran by Blizzard. NALCS is ran by Riot. Valve, however, does not have much involvement with their esports scene, and honestly,
they actually are involving a lot more right now in Dota.
Oh, really? Continue. Okay. Past running minors and majors, they haven't done much in Counter-Strike, at least.
Yeah, they do that, but they're also like actually just making calls now for like Dota, like in terms of like streaming who has rights to the game and stuff like that. They've been actually
Interesting.
making statements. I think the big difference between like Valve, Blizzard, and Riot is that Blizzard and Riot make the most off of their games and their esports, whereas Valve makes most of their money off of Steam and the Steam market.
That's very true. Yeah.
So, in a sense, it's better for both Blizzard and Riot to franchise because it secures them the most money as a business.
Yep.
Whereas Valve doesn't necessarily have to do that because this isn't their main income. They can just kind of do it in a way that they think like I think like they're doing it as Valve as a spectator of the Dota 2, not as a developer because they don't need to rely on it.
I think
Which is a little different.
Probably do another episode just talking about like developers and their philosophies on esports involvement, but I think you brought up a really good point there, and I would have stated it differently, but I agree that I don't expect to see Valve ever franchise, though there have been rumors of a franchise league occurring in Counter-Strike from a couple of different tournament organizers. Nothing's come to surface yet, and there's also been a lot of speculation that Valve doesn't proactively step in, but what they will do is when they see things they don't like happening, they will step in retroactively or reactively.
They react quite a bit.
And there's a lot of speculation that there's something might have happened and they might have tried to have squashed that from occurring. So that's a little bit interesting if that's true, but it's pretty like rumory. Yeah, I don't know if you have anything else you want to bring up with that, Jay.
I have nothing in regards to Valve. I've barely touched that app.
All right, fair enough.
Do you have any like? One thing I do think is really weird. So I've been to I went to the international. You went to like a CS:GO major.
Two of them.
The difference between the international. So if you watch Overwatch League, Blizzard's there. Like the main thing is Overwatch League. It's there, but it's clearly it's made by Blizzard kind of thing.
Yep.
You go to Worlds. It's Worlds presented by like Riot, right? It's clearly presented.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
I went to international. Literally, the only Valve symbol I saw was the Valve Stores symbol on like the merchandise you bought at the Dota 2 secret shop.
Oh, we didn't even have a Valve store. We didn't even.
No, it's called the Dota 2 secret shop. It's not even called like the Valve store. It's called the Dota 2 secret shop. It just on the tag it has Valve on there. Like you really have to look for a Valve symbol, and I think that is so weird compared to other things. And I think it's more because Valve doesn't need to put their name out there.
I don't know specifically in Dota, but when there's actually a really interesting video that came out recently about how Valve handles majors more specifically in detail that I want to go watch. I just haven't had the chance to yet. But my understanding of it and the community's understanding of how this functioned as of a couple of months ago was basically that tournament organizers will pitch their potential theoretical major to Valve, and then based off of their pitch, their reputation, both in terms of quality and previous events they've hosted, will reach out to them and license out their bi/triannual major event to a tournament organizer to host at a location. And so it's basically like the tournament organizer is pitching it to Valve, but at the end of the day, they're the ones running the event. Valve is essentially just paying them some amount of money and is making an appearance to make sure that it's up to their standards at the end of the day.
Same with Dota. So like
okay.
Yeah.
But it's really not a Valve event. It's like, for example, I went to MLG, or the major in Columbus ran by MLG. It was an MLG event where things were changed from an MLG event slightly to meet Valve standards or requirements. It was an MLG event. And like when I went to Atlanta, it was PGL. It was a PGL event with standards that Valve wanted enforced.
Yeah, and same thing with Dota for their majors and minors. the same thing. The only difference is that the international, like I know that last international was put on by PGL. However, if you just as a spectator and you don't pay attention to it, you probably would never find that out. Like you would have to like stay for like some ad somewhere during the stream after it ends or something. Like I know it basically because there was like a PGL person like doing things for like trying to get on. It's like a PGL account for Reddit doing the things, but all like the streams are on Dota 2 International, Dota TI. I think Overwatch League is on Overwatch League. I think Leagues is on. Is it Riot Games or is it called League of Legends? I'm just curious what the Twitch stream is called. You know, Jay?
I'm sorry, what was that?
You know if what the Twitch stream is called when they do like LCS stuff? Is it called like?
Oh, it's called Riot Games.
Is it Riot Games? Okay.
Yeah, it's yeah.
Which is, I don't know. I mean, there's nothing really wrong with that. I mean, you're just kind of promoting your brand in a way. But I feel like
yeah, it's purely. I mean, okay. Other than Tencent, like League of Legends is Riot Games, so
that's true. I guess because they don't really have any other sort of thing, so it's almost synonymous with each other. But I guess that's not for Valve. They don't really care. Also, Valve Dota is also the weird thing where like. I mean, like, you can argue, like, what came from what from, like, different games and stuff, but Dota was literally not Valve's game, and they just picked it up and produced it, which is kind of not how most esports games are made. They're made by the developers. Like, yes, the Valve developers at the Dota team are the developers of the game, and they care about the game a lot, but Valve as a company was not the original developers of that game. And I guess that's just kind of different. Because, I mean, they were the original developers like CSGO. However, for Dota, they just pulled IceFrog.
No.
No? They weren't?
Same story as Dota. It was a mod. It's community organized, kind of. And then they hired the developers, and then they kind of took it. Yeah. Similar story as Dota, actually.
So, like, whereas Riot Games... However, if you want to say, like, that League of Legends is a copy of Dota mod, it kind of is in a way. But it's not. That's not important. It's, like... Riot developers, they like I think like they got them to play League and like it's Riot's game is League. Blizzard makes Overwatch, right? They make other games, but they made Overwatch in a way. Whereas I think Valve as a company, not as like a developer, is slightly more disconnected from their game, because they have like the overarching, like they don't even make games anymore besides like a side effect. I think I'm trailing off into I'm just repeating myself at this point.
It's alright, buddy.
No, you're
I think we all are a little bit. Do you have
I just
anything
find it
else that
interesting.
you want to add in, Jay? No, I do too.
No, I'm good.
Okay.
Also, I should mention there, I don't think that's a pro or a con to any of those stories. I just find it interesting how they're different.
No, I agree. I think we have a lot of future topics that we've mentioned that we want to do episodes on.
Oh, can I mention real quick? Going back to players, player burnout. I don't think that's a thing in franchising, right? Players don't get burned out.
I disagree.
I disagree too.
I disagree
they
a
get
lot.
burned out.
I think if anything, it's more so because there's so many players trying to get in that can't. That if you burn out and aren't just doing, I mean, you don't even need to perform. If you're just like not practicing to the same level, you'll just get cut. Whereas they need you to survive in an open league. They can't just drop you.
Sneaky.
Oh yeah, I guess that is a little bit different.
But I disagree with that actually. I think burnout is a huge thing in franchise leagues.
I was kind of like the thing like last year, which was really bad for Dota, is all the tournaments were way too close to each other, and teams went to every tournament because they made them close to each other, expecting teams not to go to every tournament. But if you weren't like the top 4 teams of the DPC and you wanted to secure your invite to TI, you just went to every tournament you could. And
I think it
was really bad for players, and also like even like analysts and casters were just sick and tired like the second half of the DPC.
I'm not sure what the solution is for analysts and casters, but at least in terms of players and teams, I think the oversaturation of tournaments was more of a specific issue with Dota, because I've seen this issue in like Counter-Strike and StarCraft, and the resolution was always just that, like, you don't have to go to these at the end of the day if you don't need the money, like, right away. But the problem with Dota is that
you needed the
need
points.
to go to the international, and you need to play in everything to get there. So everything is required. Whereas in Counter-Strike, like, if you don't need, like, the $1,000 or whatever it is to go, like, that you'll probably make going to the tournament this weekend, then, like, you can just take a week off, and it doesn't really mean anything.
I mean, it's like you can do super well the whole year as a team in Dota 2, and if you just don't go to TI, nobody remembers you that year, which is just kind of sucks.
I think
for that team,
that's more of a jab at the issues of how TI qualification works than it is at like open ecosystem.
TI is
almost
almost
personally
too important to Dota versus like Worlds to League.
No, I agree.
It's like TI is almost way too important.
I think we can talk about this more in like a future episode because this doesn't really have as much to do with franchising. But
let's keep up. Good point. Well, you had other points, right?
Yeah, I'd like to bring up like how player salaries function. So I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but in an open ecosystem, sounds kind of bullshit. But like in an open system, obviously the top players get paid more, and then it just slowly tapers off down to like the tier 3, which could consist of a couple hundred players. But in theory, it's much larger than a franchise system. I say in theory because there's not really like a proven franchise system in esports yet. Like we don't know how many teams you can sustain properly in a franchise system. But what's up?
Also, in a non-franchise system, we have no idea what the team salaries are. I think like VP at one point released their CS:GO salaries like a couple years ago.
I think public information is an issue just in general because even with franchise systems, they're still not publicized. So I mean.
Oh, that's right. They got that. The Overwatch one got leaked. It wasn't actually published, right?
That was only one player's salary.
Okay.
It wasn't even an entire team's. It's like one player out of 100. Fair. But no, I agree. I think I guess to quickly hit that point, I think having public information just benefits everybody. Because I mean, you might get lucky and get paid way more than you're worth as a player, but you also might get paid way less. And either way, like at least personally, I would rather see players get paid what they're worth and get a fair rate.
I think that's at least really important in franchising. I think it's less important in a non-franchise system because you still have the prize pools. But in a franchise system, going up with player, you have no idea how much money you're going to make.
I don't know
when you become pro.
I don't know if I would call one more problematic than the other, but I think we agree. We just agree here that like it's just bad. We agree. Yeah, it's just So anyway, in a franchise system, like I was saying, like in an open league, it kind of tapers off to the tier 3 eventually. But in a franchise system, you kind of have this like tiered slope thing where in the top level, it like everybody in the actual league gets paid a ton of money, and then the top players get paid way more. And then there's a massive drop off for the tier 2, where the tier 2 players are barely making like any money. So the top players are like, I would say, say we had a perfectly accurate ranking of the top players in the world. I would say that players like number 30 through 80 make a lot more money in a franchise system than in an open ecosystem, but players like 80 through like 250 make much, much less. So it comes down to whether or not you think those top players should be compensated more than the tier 3, but I think it makes it more difficult to support tier 2 and tier 3 franchise systems without the economics being there, which I don't see in the current system personally, at least. Also, if salary caps are introduced, that's another big meme that we'd have to talk about and handle with, but I haven't heard any serious discussions of that yet.
Dota's very top heavy as well. I think more than most open systems, like way more than CS:GO. But most of that is again because TI is way too important. Like the top, like it was like 1.5 million for like this major. TI, it's like 24 million. That's a big jump. So that's why TI is so important in Dota, because if you don't go to TI, you don't make money that year. Like it's hard to make money in Dota without going to TI, which is rough. So it hurts tier 2 teams in that sense. But again, I don't know what their salaries are, so it's hard to say it completely. But it's really top heavy still. I think like in Dota, like getting 50%, like the top team gets like almost 50% of winning the international. Like it doesn't actually trickle out as much, I think, as it should.
Yeah. Jay, is there any information you've heard in regards to change in like player salaries or compensation or money in the league going from an open ecosystem to a franchise system? Because I think League is a little bit of a unique example in that it was open before it went franchised, or at least partially open.
I can't say I'm well informed, but like as far as I know, like salaries are pretty stable in NA. Like
they didn't change much, or they're stable now because of the franchising.
No, I mean they're getting paid more than what they used to be before franchising.
Gotcha.
But I mean they also stream, like if they have time like after scrims, then they just stream on the side. Some more popular than others. Like there's some players that don't stream, pros that don't stream at all, and then there's some like Double Lift and Sneaky that like get 10K viewers each stream when they do have the time. But yeah, it's just, I mean there are players that are worth more than other players, of course, but I mean all in all, just like everybody's well off in money. I think 100 Thieves bought everyone like Yeezys. Yeah. They bought the entire roster Yeezys, but I mean they're owned by the Cavs.
A player
I guess...
on VP got gifted a what was it, a Mercedes or
Oh, that's ESL. Yeah, ESL kept giving away MVP votes and gave away Mercedes this year.
Oh no, he just straight up just got like given a car by like the company.
Oh, ESL was giving out Mercedes, but
it was like a player bonus or something.
I was gonna bring something up.
What's up? Yeah, go for it.
Shoot.
Oh, rip. Never mind then.
Give me a moment. I'll think about it again.
All right, give me a moment.
What did Jay just talk about?
Jay talked about the LCS, Kevin.
Yes.
He was talking about player salaries in NA.
They are fairly lucrative.
They're making dollars in North America.
Oh god.
I mean, Double Lift started out from. But.
Kevin might have a witty comment.
No. I forgot.
Never mind. All right. Well, if Kevin remembers what it is, he can bring it up. But I think my last point is that a lot of the discussions that we've been having is referencing how esports has functioned in the past, or referencing like franchising models in traditional sports, which are very different than how esports functions. And there hasn't really been any successful examples of franchising in esports yet to reference. So a lot of what we've had to talk about, we don't have a lot of concrete examples of yet, or just purely hypothetical, just because that's the nature of how things are in late 2018.
There's also one more I should put down as like a note. It's not really like a full discussion thing. Is that a lot of franchising is based off of like what's it called? Normal sports, typical sports, whatever you want to call it. And the difference between what I would call typical sports, like your football, soccer, and then esports, is that it's much easier for your spectators to play pretty much the same as the pros.
Yep.
Which is very different from normal sports. So that's the one thing that scares me about franchising, is if you're basing it off of a thing that it's not the same as.
Mm-hmm.
But
that's fair.
Yeah.
Weasel Dude said there's a fairly distinct difference between salaries between NA and EU LCS from what I recall.
Hell yeah.
Was that because of NA LCS franchising though, or was that previous to franchising occurring? It's often been the joke in the community that a lot of EU pros moving to NA for a much higher salary.
Yeah, this is highly memed about. Power of money, fucking Febivin.
So you're saying this was because of franchising, not before it? Like NA wasn't just getting paid more money before franchising happened?
Yeah. As soon as franchising happened, like a lot of money started coming in from both NBA. I think even before franchising, Team Liquid got like a sponsorship from like Disney, and that was like in itself like huge.
I don't think it was straight Disney. I think it was a Disney affiliated thing, but Disney owns a lot of things. But that is correct. Team Liquid did that. They also did that right after they won TI for Dota 2. So Liquid had a lot of sponsors lined up right now.
It's really funny because
stars align for
ULCS is just like I think ULCS is just the much better region right now. I mean, aside from like Rift Rivals, they've always been like we've always had to import talent either from Korea or EU, but it's just like it's kind of unfortunate because NA pros have to play on 60 ping because they all live in Cali and that's where like the LCS studios are, but they like moved the servers to Chicago or Chicago. So like they get 60 ping and it's just like absolutely awful if you want to like actually play as a pro and like have a chance in international tournaments because I mean Korea just plays on like 9 ping and it's like 9 to 7 and it's actually insane. And
it's
then
like
EU,
that in a lot of games though.
Right. I actually played like a bit of EU solo queue back when I was there, and their ping in EU West is like, if I remember correctly, like even like hotel Wi-Fi, it's like 20 to 30, which is like still really good. And what else was I gonna say?
Is LCS played on is it not played on LAN? Like actual LCS games?
Well, it's played on LAN, I think. I wouldn't quote me on that. I think it's played on LAN, but like in solo queue, which in like and then scrims,
I guess. Scrims would be online.
Yeah, like that's like their main way of improving, and they just don't have good quality.
As far as I know, Dota 2 still does not currently have a LAN feature in the game that you can do on there. Is no local play.
Like you guys have like
TI's played on a separate server, but there's no local play for Dota 2, which is weird.
Counter-Strike has LAN, just flat out has it. StarCraft did not have LAN, and actually the way the servers worked was that regardless of how close you were to the server, you had a minimum of 50 ping.
I'm slightly wrong though, but continue.
With the exception of WCS, they specifically made a LAN client that was only used for WCS. It was not used for the qualifiers, though. It was only used for actual WCS matches. Overwatch is in a similar system, except their netcode is different, so it doesn't have that that minimum ping. It's all online with no LAN, with the exception of official Overwatch League matches, which do have a LAN client.
I'm going to take back my statement because I've totally hosted a game on my own LAN before, just other people playing on my network, so they probably do it on a LAN at TI or at tournaments. But Valve can do that, but I'm not sure about tournament organizers can. No, you can host it on your own thing, but I'm just the one weird thing that I don't like about non-franchise things is that the producer of the tournament is not directly with the developer of the game. So if you have something that like that you want to fix with the game, you can't really just do it. Whereas Overwatch League, they just have the developers there; they can just fix it, which is much nicer with a franchise system versus a non-franchise system.
For sure, I think the developer has to be involved to some extent to make a franchise league successful. Whether that's them directly running it, which is pretty spooky, kinda, to be honest. Or just being partnered with them. I think that needs to be a relationship that's pretty important. I mean, the whole, you talked about this a little bit with Dota, but just how content is streamed is a huge deal. Like you said, anybody can stream matches off of Dota TV. That's not something that's been resolved in other games. Like in Blizzard has some really weird rules on Overwatch, actually. You can't, this is why there's no third-party tournaments going on right now. It's not because all the top pro players are playing in Overwatch League. Well, I mean, that has to do with it. But the reason why is because there's, flat out a rule that, you can't stream a tournament with a 10K plus prize pool during Overwatch League. So, 8 months out of the year, you just, can't run anything of, considerable size. So it's just,
Dota actually just did a very similar. It's different. If you're, you might not be familiar with how Dota TV works and Dota TV tickets work. Are you familiar?
Not really, no.
So to get your a tournament, an actual tournament, you throw your tournament to Valve, and then you pay for a ticket, and then it pulls up into the Dota TV in client, where people can spectate it. You can view matches, and that's where Pro games, that's how stats are recorded. They're recorded because the games are saved in the client. Now for next year, during a major or a minor, you cannot have a ticketed event in Dota TV now. So you can still have an event during it. However, like stats, you cannot record stats from those games. Like they will be gone in a week, kind of thing. Which is different than normal. However, there's still a decent chunk of space in between tournaments of Dota 2, like that you can run a tournament on. But that is a fairly new thing. That's just this year for Dota. But Dota TV is very weird from anything else. I think Dota TV is amazing for esports, but that's a different podcast topic.
Yep. Jay, do you have anything else you want to add in?
Nope, I'm good.
All right.
All in all,
yep.
Is franchising good? I don't know.
I think it's
overall, I think it's a good idea.
Is a good idea, but it's definitely got some issues. Some of them I think will just kind of be ironed out over time, but some of them I think are legitimate long-term issues that I don't see solutions being actively pursued for. So I'm spooky boy, though I think it's for the best in the long term potentially.
And I think
the current model isn't the best.
Yeah. And I think the Dota per circuit model, I think it works, but not for every game. And I think Valve can make it work, but I'm not sure. Like
really
games,
like how the Counter-Strike model works with basically it's the Dota model without like making every tournament mean everything.
Yes, it's because there's no TI for Counter-Strike.
I actually like that there's not an international. We can talk about that in another episode. I actually really like that they don't have an international. I actually think that's super crucial because it just makes the entire world of Dota evolve around one event, which I don't think is healthy, but we can talk about that more another time.
Yeah, we can talk about more, but like it's so, I don't know. Dota's weird in that respect, I think, compared to most other things. Because like for like LCS, it's winning NALCS. It's getting 2 worlds. It's not winning worlds, where I think all the players want to win worlds, but you're not considered as you can be considered a successful team without placing really high in worlds. I think. I may be wrong on that, but same with Overwatch in a way. Like you just kind of do decent, and even without, let's say, winning the finals, because I guess the finals haven't happened yet for the first this thing, but I think you as an Overwatch League can regard as a very successful team without winning or doing really well at the finals. I think if you did, I may be wrong at that, but it's kind of like
I think every game has that problem to an extent.
I think pretty much every team in a franchise team, with maybe few exceptions, is regarded as a very successful team. And whereas in an open kind of style, not franchise, that's not the case. There's exceptions to that, of course. But I think in general, I think it applies.
I think that has more to do with how you go about marketing when you're in a franchise league. So when you're in a franchise league, you know these teams are in the league. So you market for these teams being good teams. But when you have an open league, you have I don't know, we'll be generous and say half the teams regularly are there in your tournament 90% of the time. So you can advertise for those teams, but a casual esports fan is not going to know the second half of the teams as being marketed as good, successful teams. And I think a lot of that comes down more to marketability and advertising than it does the actual skill of the team personally.
Okay, fair enough. I can agree with your point there. Yeah, I think I've covered everything about franchising.
Yeah, I think that was about all I had to talk about. Jay, do you have anything else you want to bring up?
No, that's basically all I felt about franchising.
Do you think it's a good idea, Jay?
Do you have any closing thoughts? Do you think it's good, bad, in between? What's your overall? Bring it together, Jay.
I think it's a step in the right direction, but I mean, it's basically just. I think I think it does kill competitiveness. I think a lot of players in NALCS are really complacent.
I would argue against that. However, I don't watch.
I see your point,
League
but I don't know about League either.
Yeah, but I would argue against, because at the end of the day, I think there's the outstanding cases of people that are just doing it for money. But at the end of the day, I think like 90% of your players in your franchise league or your open league are doing it to win and be competitive. I think there's outliers, but I think majority of the time it's the players that, I mean, they're just competitive by nature, I think.
I mean, yeah, it could also just be NA culture, but yeah, I just I don't have a lot of hope for NA.
All right, well, on that note, let's
Weasel did agree with Jay, but NA.
Yeah, Weasel dude agrees with Jay. Okay. On that note, we'll wrap things up. Do you guys want to plug your social media and Twitch memes?
I don't have a Twitter nor an Instagram. I don't use Facebook.
All right, so, Kevin doesn't exist anywhere on the internet.
Follow me on Patreon.com/
I totally made a Twitter. I don't know what it's called. But I never
plug your Twitch or your Twitter or anything.
Follow me on myfreecams.com.
Oh god. Yeah. We'll probably go again. I don't know what next topic we're doing. I feel like
I think
money.
We'll do next. I don't know what topic we're going to talk about next, but we'll probably talk next week.
We'll decide.
This next Wednesday at 6:30 again, if you guys are cool with that.
Probably about the same time. Yep.
Are we allowed to watch
movies? Tune in here.
Is that allowed?
No,
watch
you're
movies
definitely
on Twitch?
not allowed to. Well, if it's like something before like 1940, then yeah. But like
if the copyright's still up, you have to pay for a license to show it.
Yeah, let's not go down that route. Anyway, we can talk about this, but that'll be it for today.
That'll be it for today.
Thanks for watching, guys. I appreciate it.
Thanks for watching.
All right, good night, guys.